Hi, simply call me Oleg. This is a long story, so I am writing it in a series of emails, rather than all at once. Please integrate them into one narration, and feel free to improve my style. I am not a natural storyteller, but I'd appreciate it if I could approve your final version. Anyway, let me begin. The story I am about to tell you comes from my grandmother, whom we lovingly called Baba, which is short for babushka. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, me, my parents, my brother, and my maternal grandparents all left Moscow for the U.S. About a year later, my grandfather passed away. While her husband, my grandfather, had cancer, Baba spent all her time taking care of him and managing the household while both my parents worked. After that, my grandmother and I became very close. We were close before, but with my grandfather gone, she started focusing more on her grandchildren, me and my brother Sasha. My brother and I were in our early teens at that time. While my parents came home late from work, Baba would see to our needs, cooking, clean clothing, and more. She was quite a deep thinker, which is maybe why she and I connected so well. Sasha, on the other hand, was not so interested in Baba's stories. He was very much into his sports. We always knew Baba worked for some government ministry, but we never knew exactly what she did. In the Soviet Union, everyone was a civil servant, so that was very normal. However, during one conversation, I discovered that Baba worked for the KGB. Being interested in anything involving intrigue, mention of the KGB sparked my interest in her career history. One evening at the dinner table, Sasha made fun of a UFO-related program on TV. Baba warned him not to laugh. I could see she wanted to say something, but Mama gave her the look. Yet, Baba's reaction to Sasha's flippant remarks puzzled me. I later found out that Mama knew that Baba worked for an experimental unit within the KGB, but was never allowed to discuss the finer details with her family. I now also understand that the little bit Mama did know made her uncomfortable and so discouraged Baba from ever talking about it with us. The next day after school, I asked Baba why she was annoyed with Sasha laughing at the mention of aliens and UFOs on television. It turns out Baba worked for a special department in the KGB that investigated supernatural phenomena, etc. This piqued my interest, and over the weeks and months to come, I asked her many questions, and she shared a lot with me. Of course, I can't remember all the details she told me. She began her career with the KGB in her late 20s. Trained as a psychologist, Baba joined the specialized department to leverage her expertise. Her dual reporting lines were to both the department's commanding officer and the party. Her primary responsibility included monitoring the mental well-being of team members, crucial given the extraordinary situations they encountered. Additionally, she oversaw the induction of internal recruits. To supplement her duties, she managed all administrative tasks within the team, effectively serving as the commanding officer's de facto personal assistant. This role granted her access to a trove of information about individuals and numerous peculiar projects and incidents. The particular department conducted extensive research on various topics, particularly UFOs, and it went beyond mere research. One of the things she told me is that UFOs are not a new phenomenon. They have been around throughout human history and likely even prehistory. She also said they had artifacts, some technological, though extremely decayed. These artifacts were sourced from across the vast territories of the USSR, previously the Russian Empire and beyond. Apparently, much of it had been in a collection owned by the Tsars and also the Russian Orthodox Church before the 1917 revolution. A quick request: if you haven't subscribed yet and you value our videos, please hit the subscribe and like buttons and leave a comment below. It means the world to us. Now, let's return to our story. An extraordinary conclusion they reached from the earliest records, spanning ages up to modern observations, was the apparent lack of technological progress among these UFOs over millennia. They theorized that time travel might be involved, which could explain the lack of technological evolution over time. Either that, or wherever they are from, time is passing at a much slower rate. As in the rest of the world, abductions were also a phenomenon in the USSR. Similar to the West, Soviet citizens were not forthcoming about their experiences. While in the West experiencers often fear ridicule, in the Soviet Union the fear was more existential. People who claimed to have had encounters with aliens were labeled insane and got institutionalized, never to be free again. UFO activities increased during the Great Patriotic War, known as the Second World War in the West, and remained at that level afterwards. However, a year before the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, the activity drastically increased. She said the UFO operators knew in advance what we were up to. As the USSR built up its nuclear arsenal, UFO activity and abductions increased. By the late 1950s, UFO activities at Soviet nuclear weapons facilities had become problematic. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev insisted that the KGB and the army find out what was happening, determine whether it posed a threat, and take action if necessary. Of course, the Soviets were also interested in the technology involved. Baba said they discovered from their American operatives that the Americans had been in so-called diplomatic contact with these entities since the Eisenhower administration. Khrushchev was apparently beside himself, according to a note she saw, as the USSR had no such contact. This prompted the need to establish communication with these entities. Receiving this order was both an exciting opportunity and a massive challenge. How to achieve such contact was a mystery by itself. However, the prospect of such communication promised valuable information about UFOs and their operators. Making contact was challenging. While Baba was not part of these operations, her administrative and support roles granted her access to a lot of classified information. Locating UFO activities ranged from easy to difficult, and various radio signals were sent in attempts to make contact. Even though Baba was no longer working for the KGB or living in Russia, she withheld some information from me. I sometimes think it was for two reasons: to protect me, and I have a suspicion that some of it was pretty dark and didn't sit well with her. None of the electronic technologies they tried for making contact delivered any results. In the early 1960s, they resorted to another joint military KGB program that used psychics to spy on the USA through deep meditative states. This is when they started having success. These operatives made contact with the entities on their first attempt. A protocol was then established for further communication, and from there, progress moved quickly. Soon the first face-to-face meeting with the entities was arranged. Baba was not present at these meetings, but she was responsible for collating and integrating all the reports from those involved. She mentioned there were only 2 face-to-face meetings in the first year, and in the subsequent years never more than 1 meeting per year. Not all information passed through her hands. Some of it was deemed so highly classified that only the head of the unit and the agents directly involved had access. I regrettably never asked how she knew this. I was only a teenager at the time. Though she shared these stories as a way to bond with me, recognizing my keen interest, I think it was also a means for her to process the past. In the U.S., she was in a different world and time and could talk about things that previously would have put her in a labor camp at least. Baba was never nostalgic about the Soviet Union. She was clearly very happy to be away from the KGB's grip. She once told me, One never truly retires from the KGB. She explained that even though she was never an agent, after her retirement she was expected to keep tabs on the neighbors and report any strange activities. She hated it. The collapse of the USSR, the chaos in the following months, our emigration, and the dissolution of the KGB in 1991 meant she was free. She was the one who pushed my parents to get jobs in the US so that we could all get out. There were a lot of things she did not want to talk about. She was terrified the Communist Party might somehow regain power. She only gave me morsels of what the agreements with the entities or UFO aliens involved. She said a deal was struck because the Soviets feared the entities were providing strategic information about their nuclear missile bases to the Americans. Up to that point, Soviet jets were scrambled whenever UFO blips appeared on radar. The MiGs and Sukhois, of course, were no match for the strange and fast maneuvers of the UFOs. However, in a few instances, missiles fired by these jets did hit UFO craft. At least one was shot down. Some were apparently damaged but did not come down. Generally, the chances of jets bringing down a UFO were very remote, but even that risk must have been unacceptable to their operators. Both sides wanted something, and both sides had something to give. An agreement was reached allowing the UFOs to operate freely in exchange for information on American strategic capabilities. Baba said it was ironic, as they were convinced the entities made the same deal with the Americans. She hinted at other details in the agreement, details that brought her to silence. She then seemed very depressed and changed the topic. She did reveal, as one might imagine, that after the agreement, reports of abductions increased significantly, even though Soviet citizens were generally not very forthcoming. Regarding how information about the Americans was shared, she said it was done in various ways. Sometimes it was relayed via the psychics. Other times, agents would receive phone calls where the person on the other side would speak to them, either in their own voice or the voice of a deceased loved one. At first, the agents found it quite disturbing, especially if it was a deceased family member's voice. Only once was she taken along to a face-to-face meeting with the entities. There was concern in the Kremlin as to how the negotiators were interacting with the entities, and thus, as psychologist, with the required clearance and knowledge of the subject matter, she was tasked to do a first-hand observation. She described it as the most surreal experience of her life. The whole event took place in a hangar at a secret Air Force base outside Moscow. These secret bases were scattered throughout the USSR. They arrived before the visitors. Tables were set out in the hangar. Humans would sit on one side and the visitors on the other. As they waited at the table, the phone rang, informing them that the visitors had arrived. She did not see the craft land. She mentioned, besides herself, the attendees were 2 senior agents and other high-ranking officials from the Kremlin, the KGB, and the military. Everyone went silent when the visitors came in. There were only 4 of them, accompanied by 2 Air Force officers guiding them to the table. Their footsteps were the only sound echoing through the vast hangar. It was an odd sight. They were short, the size of elementary school children, dressed in what seemed to be one-piece suits made from a black fabric. It had no collars or such. She said the sight of their huge bulbous heads and large black eyes sent shivers down her neck. She also mentioned something about their digits, though I can't recall if it was too many or too few. The chairs were almost too high for them, but they managed to take their seats much like children. Baba said the entities never appeared intimidated by the disproportionate human presence or our weapons. The humans spoke verbally, but the visitors communicated telepathically, and only to those they intended to hear their messages. Only the high-ranking officials at the table received their communications. She and the general's aide-de-camp were excluded. She couldn't assess the visitors' behavior, and that was in any case not her task. However, she still tried, but found it hard since she had no idea what they were communicating, and because they were so strange. So, she kept her focus on her task, which was to monitor her colleagues. The KGB agents did most of the talking and seemed superb at handling the situation, never appearing unnerved. However, she noted that the Kremlin official, and to a lesser extent the one general, seemed a little on edge. She recommended in her report that they be better prepared for dealing with non-human entities in future meetings. Furthermore, she said that one of the entities looked her way several times, which made her quite uncomfortable. Though she couldn't be certain it was looking directly at her, as their eyes lacked visible pupils and she couldn't pinpoint their gaze, she could feel her thoughts being scanned. It was the strangest feeling of her life. She described it as an echo in her thoughts, which at times impeded her from her monitoring role. She felt thoroughly unnerved when this happened, but managed to hide it well from her colleagues, thanks to her training. However, she was pretty sure the entity knew exactly what she was experiencing. There's much more to share about this event, but it's getting long, so I will only mention 2 more things about it. Baba mentioned an interesting personal observation. She said that the moment those entities entered the room, despite having no outward signs of gender, she immediately felt they emanated a female presence. She attributed this to her own female intuition, as the men had no idea what gender the entities were. The most staggering of her intuitive senses, however, was this. As strange as they were, there was something terribly familiar about them, like they belonged here, like they were part of us. Baba said that experience had a significant impact on her life. She mentioned that in the years that followed, they discovered the information provided by the entities about the U.S. military was generally of little value. It was either information they already knew or simply low-value data. It seemed like the entities were deliberately withholding much from them. Through strategically positioned agents in the U.S., the KGB learned that the entities were playing the Americans in the same way. Baba concluded that the entities exploited the mistrust between the USA and USSR to gain unchallenged access to our airspace and other concessions. The USSR received little in return. She said it often seemed as though the entities were deliberately trying to confuse the humans with contradictory information. She would say with a sense of repulsion, "It seemed they wanted access to our minds, and we gave it to them." Her assessment of them was that they were deceitful and seemed to enjoy misleading the humans. She often fell silent, mentioning her serious upset with some of the agreements reached with them, but she had no authority to express her views. She never elaborated, becoming very sad and quiet instead. There were terrible things she hinted at but never fully explained. She said her seniors felt frustrated by their interactions with the entities, and over the years, the entire project failed and was abandoned in phases, or at least that's what she was led to believe. It was not uncommon for some secret projects to be shut down and then simply reopened under a different cell within the KGB. This ensured that the lower echelons, like herself, lost track of a project's progress. In a totalitarian system like the USSR, having many people know only bits and pieces was seen as less of a threat than having a few people know too much. Those who knew only fragments of information would never speak out for fear of ending up in a labor camp, or worse, while those who knew too much would have enormous leverage to gain control over their superiors. Baba said only the highest-ranking officials really knew what happened with the project, but she was gradually moved on to other projects of a less strange nature. Given her central administrative role in the unit, I sensed that Baba knew more than she should have, which might explain why she feared the KGB all her life. Baba passed away in 2000, and I regret not having the foresight to write down or audio record her experiences at the KGB. I believe a great deal of valuable and interesting information went to the grave with her. Regards, Oleg.